Again, good morning. Welcome to Jordan High School. We're going to make a quick change. I know it's been announced that this is a memorial, but after talking it over with everyone, we decided to make this a celebration of the life of James Melroy. For those of you who knew him, you knew that he wouldn't want us to be sitting here crying about his passing, rather celebrating his life. And in fact, if probably the last time you saw James, he probably made you smile instead of making you cry. So we want to keep that going. We don't want the last memory of James, of us crying about his passing. We want his last memory of James, of him making us smile. And today, with the speakers we have, hopefully we can accomplish that today and leave you here with a sense of a good feeling as opposed to somber and tears. For those of you who don't recognize me or don't know me, well, at least don't recognize me without a baseball cap on, my name is Andres Cardenas. I work with James for the last 2.5 years at the Press-Telegram. But I'm just one of many people that he worked with and became friends with and things like that. Before I begin, I want to say a couple things. First of all, as you came in, you saw these. You're free to take these. These are his final pages. We make copies for everyone, so you can take that with you and whatnot. The back side is a memorial T-shirt we've created for him. Information on where to find his T-shirt online. We'll explain this more later in the ceremony, but for right now, if you could pick one of these up before you leave, that'd be great. It's all the money made, all the proceeds go to the James Melroy Memorial Fund, and so if you have any questions, come see me, and we'll get you situated in that. Also, I created directions to the reception for those of you that are going to the reception afterwards. We have directions, and also on the side, with the help of Robert Meeks, who's filming this, if anybody wants to get a copy of a DVD, or also, the other thing we're also creating for James is a memorial book, stories and comments from friends and family. It's still not complete, but when we do get it complete, we'll let you know. My email address is on here, so if you have any questions about finding this, you can get a hold of me there, and I can tell you when everything's completed. Hopefully within a month, we can have everything done. Looking a little nicer than this. I just threw this together. I don't want to say that, but just to give a sense of what this book will be. There are stories in here, and so if you're interested in purchasing a copy of this, again, all the proceeds will then go to the James Melroy Memorial Fund. And just send me an email, and I'll get that to you. Get any information I get as soon as I know it. Again, we're here to celebrate the life of James Melroy. And like I said, we've come up with speakers that we thought James would love to hear speak on his behalf. The first speaker is Pamela Hale-Burns. Is that right? I hope I didn't screw it up. Sorry. We all know that, for those who knew James wasn't a church-going person, but we do know he was spiritual. And we thought it would be appropriate to open the ceremony with a prayer, however, who to give it. And Pam was a religion columnist at the Press-Telegram, and Pam also knew James from their days at Long Beach City College. So we thought if anybody would be appropriate, it'd be Pam, because she knew James very well, and we think that he would love to hear her say the opening prayer. So, Pam?
Let us pray. Lord, we thank you for another day of our health and our strength today, Father. We thank you for our friends and our loved ones. We thank you for this opportunity to come together and celebrate the life of our friend, of our brother, of our son, of our relative, just as of our associate, Father. We just thank you for this opportunity. We thank you for the time that you gave us with James. We thank you for the memories that we will carry for the rest of our lives, Father. We thank you, and we ask that you would comfort his mother at this time in her time of grief, Father, as she grieves for her son and her father. We lift them up today, Father. Encourage them, strengthen them, and give them a joy that surpasses all understanding. In Jesus' Jesus' name, amen. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. James chapter 1, verse 12. As Andreas has said, this is not a memorial service. This is a celebration of life. The life of James Roy Melroy, an awesome man, an awesome friend, and a friend who loved and who was loved. He was a blessed man who was a blessing to those who had the privilege to know him. The word blessed means to bring happiness, pleasure, or contentment. James was a blessing in our lives. He was a true friend to so many. He loved to laugh, and he was a very funny person, as some of you will hear his friends share today. He was a dependable and dedicated employee and co-worker. And he was an excellent sports writer who was passionate about his personal favorite sports like wrestling, if you could call it that. I would always tell him that it wasn't real, it was fake, but he wouldn't accept that, showing me the blood and trying to convince me that it was real. When many of us first met James, we probably thought, poor guy, he's disabled. Disabled means inoperative or impaired. I can assure you that James was neither. He lived his life. Like the scripture said, he persevered under his trials. He did things in his 36 years that many of us will never have the chance to do or will take the opportunity to do. He became a Boy Scout as a young boy, and he was promoted to an Eagle Scout, the highest rank attainable in the Boy Scouting program of the Boy Scouts of America. He went to public school and on to college. He coached basketball, and he entered the workforce with all its uncertainties, and for years has given every able-bodied person a run for their money. In the almost 14 years that I've known James, I've never once heard him complain about his condition. James was my friend in every sense of the word. Our days began at Long Beach City College on the Viking staff. I will always remember our days in the food court or in the Viking office, just having a good time, talking about anything or just doing nothing. I will miss our talks about American Idol and who we liked or who we voted for, and of course, who should be voted off the show immediately. I will miss how he'd always tell our coworkers that he was the real James that I ran off and got married instead of my husband, James. I will miss our hugs and our kisses that we shared every time we saw each other. I admired and respected James for his strength. I loved him for his friendship. Since the day I met him, he was a pillar of strength. He always greeted people with a smile or a joke. He indeed persevered despite the trials of his life. As a testament to James's life, I encourage you all to live life and know that Jesus came to give us life, and not just life, but life more abundantly in him. I encourage you to love others as James loved you all. The Bible says that without love, all things that we do, anything that we do means absolutely nothing. God loved us so much that he sent his son to die for our sins, and he promised that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Confess with your mouth that God has raised him from the dead, and you shall be saved. For with the heart man believes unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. Let's cherish the moments that we shared with James. We will miss him, but we have all been blessed to have had him in our lives. My prayers are with his family. To his mother, Carol, you raised an extraordinary son, and we thank you for allowing all of us to be a part of his life. God bless you, and may he comfort your heart during this time of grief.
Thank you, Pam. Next up, we're going to bring up Stephen Carr. Stephen Carr is also a Long Beach City College alumnus, I guess you could say, that went with James there. If you can come on up, Steve. Before I bring up everybody, I spent a lot of time with James, driving him home, driving him to work, driving him to the UFC in Las Vegas, and he told me a lot of stories. And in a way, I know some people in here, I don't know everyone in here, but in a way, if you guys knew James and you guys made the effort to come out here, in a way, I think I know everybody in here in some form or another. Because in a way, he told me stories about everybody and everything that he did, and it truly was amazing. And one story I remember from Stephen was a year and a half ago. I took James to a pro wrestling show, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, and he said, "You'll have a good time, trust me." And I go, "Okay." And he goes, "Stephen Carr went with me, and he had a great time." He goes, "Well, what happened?" He goes, "Well, you just got to be careful, because you'll be sitting there just watching the action in the ring, and all of a sudden a body will start flying towards you, and if you're not careful, you're going to get hit." And I go, "Oh, okay, sure." And so we're sitting there, we're watching the show, and I'm looking up and I'm looking around, and James kind of saw the precursor to this, because he sees people moving, and when he sees people moving, he starts to move, and I wasn't really paying attention. I was looking in the ring, and then all of a sudden I see him like scurrying away real fast, and I turn to my left, and here comes three guys, with chairs. But he told me that when he went with you, it was an extremely great time, and you were surprised as well. And he wanted to share that with me, and he did. And so that's my memory of him telling me a story about you. So, Steve?
Yeah, that was pretty amazing, because when I was there, I had a chair fly right over my head. And he kind of looked and gave his classic sly smile and cackle, So he's like, ha ha. So first of all, my condolences to the family. And I'm honored. I don't know if I'll be able to hold it together, but we'll see. This is a celebration. I'm honored to say a few words about James, just as we were honored to know him as a fellow student, coworker, and friend. I met James at LBCC when I joined the Viking staff in 1995, and there I was introduced to one of his many great traits, which was his sense of humor. Sometimes twisted, but great sense of humor, all the staff, Pam, everybody, Jesse, everybody, Kevin, we all would laugh a lot, especially with him around. Trying to make deadline was another joke in itself, but we did it. But just being around each other was awesome, and especially with James bringing his spirit and his laughter was awesome, amazing, absolutely amazing. And James also was great at breaking the ice with people too as well, and messing with people a little bit too. He did it with me as well when I first met him. You see him in a chair and the politically correctness kind of comes out, and you're like, "Oh, can I help you with it? Do you need help with the door? Do you need help with this and that?" And he would kind of say, "Oh, Zach, is I'm in a chair? Huh?" And then it'd be a deadpan silence. And he'd go, "Nah, just kidding, just don't. Yeah, I do need help with that door. Thanks, I appreciate that." And he would do that to me and to everyone else. It was kind of an inside joke that he would say, "I could do it myself." He'd kind of get, but he really did, and he really did it himself. He is a great journalist, was a great journalist, and a great human being. Let's see, and the best thing was his laughter and his smile. And one thing James could do was, which is kind of rare, which was listen. He was a great listener. And to all of us, if we were stressed out or, something wasn't going right during the day, he would come up to us and, just quietly on his own, roll up to us and say, or up to me especially, and say, "Dude, you okay?" And it just made me feel good. And he also had great advice as well. He was amazing that way. He had a sense of who and how you were feeling, and he was aware, and the listening part is just one of his greatest traits too. Let's see. So when James passed away, I thought about, our purpose on this earth, and I believe many of it is to make a mark. I believe that it's to make a mark on this earth and to make a difference. And James lived his life to the fullest, and touched thousands. If you go online and you Google his name and you look up and you see the different blogs with his name on it, and they say, he taught me this, or he helped me with this, and he was just such a, open person to anybody, especially with MMA or with wrestling. He was so passionate about it that he wanted to help people move on just like he was moving on, and it's just what he loved to do, is help people as well. Says, and also, he just affected everybody. At work, his spirit was amazing, and it was great to be able to, he'd roll by and we'd just give him a little wrist bump, which is awesome. And going up with him to the PWG stuff, with his brother, and the adventures that he had and his passion for that was amazing, and some people don't know, big wrestlers knew who he was, and RVD is a big wrestler, and he had him on his cell phone, and this is this guy who was in the WWE and has jumped around a little bit in the league, but a local guy, and he felt touched enough from James that he would actually call James himself, and they would have a personal relationship, and it's just amazing. But this is a celebration, and he did leave his mark, and he left his mark in all of us, and we all will live through him as well. And there was a purpose for him on this earth, and he definitely affected all of us and left us with a lot. So, and that was his classic, humble, unselfish personality. So, rest in peace, James. We love you, and God bless.
Next up, we're going to have Pat McKean. Pat, if you can come down. Pat was, showed James what he needed to know to join the professional journalism world here at the Press-Telegram. James would always tell me stories of how much fun he had with Stephen and Pam and all the good times he had at Long Beach City College. And he said, as everybody says, the best times were in college, and because it was so fun, it was so free, and he didn't know what he was going to do. He told me after he graduated from high school, there was a period where he was unaware of what he wanted to do, and he came to Long Beach City College, took a course, and he just fell in love with it. So I'm assuming you had a lot to do with that. Pat will also be presenting an award to Carol, his mother. So I'll let you do that.
Thanks. Thank you, Andres, and to Carol, Mike, and everyone in James's family for allowing me to add a few words of recognition and a special award. And James knew a lot well before he got to City College, and I know he learned a lot at the Press-Telegram, and if I was a link between those two, I'm honored. On behalf of everyone at Long Beach City College, where James studied, and especially those of us in the journalism program who knew him so well, I would like to extend our deepest sympathy to James's family and friends. When Andres told me that the Angels baseball team atmosphere might play a role in today's service, I felt like James and I were, again, talking about our favorite team. It was easy to decide what to wear today. We know James is truly an angel in heaven today. At LBCC, James always adapted quickly to change, overcame challenges, and became a champion. From his first byline story in September 1994 about the men's soccer team, to him serving twice as editor-in-chief, something only 4 people have done since 1967, James was always a top student and a wonderful person to be with. He hooked up one of the first internet and email systems at the Viking, plugging in a long cord into the phone connection at one end and into the computer at the other. We would hear this long, screeching sound as the modem dialed up the service. I don't know how it worked, and I still really don't. I didn't know what it was doing or why James was on it all day, but he was a trailblazer in that right with some of his colleagues there. And many other students quickly learned from James. When his staff finished the paper one Wednesday afternoon in 1996, 2.5 hours early, we all posed with the clock set in the 2:30 position because we knew that record would never be broken. And as you can tell by my gray hair, that record has never been broken since. Many other students quickly learned from James. He earned the college's top honor, the Viking Award, given to the top students in the college. That was in spring 1997. Later, he wrote an investigative piece on the huge computer theft ring at the college, and then the police finally made an arrest. Many other students quickly learned from James. At the PT, I enjoyed reading his stories about the champions he covered, from the Panthers to the Vikings, from the Lancers to the Griffins, from the Rams to the Jaguars, and from the 49ers to the Bruins and Jackrabbits and everybody else. And then he wrote about mixed martial arts. I knew he didn't learn that at Long Beach City College. He learned it by doing it, connecting with people, and from his colleagues. I would occasionally have the pleasure of talking to James when I would contact the PT sports staff about local events. I thought one of these times I would invite James to be our banquet speaker at our annual awards dinner. I'm sorry that I waited too long. He possessed many of the fine journalistic qualities of Tim Russert and the humorous talent of George Carlin. I'm sure the three of them today are sharing some great stories and great laughs. Because James adapted quickly to change, overcame challenges, and became a champion, we would like to honor him and to present to his family the Dr. Jan Kehoe First Amendment Award. We established this award in fall 1996 when the former president of LBCC was retiring, and have presented 5 more since. The honor goes to someone who strongly endorses the principles of a free press despite those challenges. It was perfectly fitting when current Viking editor Fabio Marquez, current photo advisor Jim Truitt, and I chose James as the winner. And we're happy to present the Dr. Jan Kehoe First Amendment Award for summer 2008 to James Melroy Sony. Thank you.
Growing up, James got involved in the Boy Scouts, and we have 2 representatives of the Boy Scouts. But first, we're going to bring up Pat Towner. She is a member of the Long Beach Area Council of Boy Scouts in Long Beach. I'm sure he got the strength to do a lot of things with the Boy Scouts, and it's an honor that you come up here. Pat will also be presenting an award, so 2 Pats, 2 awards. That's so here you go.
Hello, my name is Pat Towner, and I'm with the Long Beach Area Council Boy Scouts, and I am here to honor James. 2% of the millions of boys that are in Boy Scouts reach the rank of Eagle Scouts. 2% of millions of boys. Eagle Scouts are presidents of the United States, Ford, and Buzz Aldrin astronauts, great men, and Eagle Scout James Melroy. Something that is a great honor. I wish I would have known him. He sounds like he was an awesome person to know, and I believe we're put on this earth for many things. One thing is to leave something behind, and it sounds like he truly reached his vocation and left a great legacy. From the Boy Scouts of America, we have a resolution of respect entitled Gone Home. And it says, whereas it has pleased our Creator to call his servant Eagle Scout James Melroy home to his final resting place, and in recognition of his devoted service to scouting and the youth of our community, therefore, we, the members of the Executive Board of the Long Beach Area Council Boy Scouts of America, hereby adopt this resolution of respect and direct its presentation to the family with our sincerest sympathies and our gratitude for sharing his life with us. Sander X. Mayuga, Council President, and Lee Martin, Scout Executive and CEO. Thank you.
Oh, a friend James made in the Boy Scouts was Matt Murray. Matt, if you can work your way down here, because you're kind of far away. They first met at the Boy Scouts. Matt's dad organized the first Boy Scout troop for people in wheelchairs, and that's how I met Matt. And here we are years later, and Matt and James worked together for how long? About 12 years? 12 years at the Press Telegram. Two lives intertwining once again. I want to tell a quick story here. I remember this happened to me one night. I'd been there at the Press Telegram for about three months, and James was in slot, the copy editor who gets the last read before it actually runs in the paper, and Matt was main designing that night. And James was there sitting next to Matt, but James had his headphones plugged into the computer listening to the internet radio. And I didn't think much of it. He did that a lot, so I was, it's typical. And I'm on the phone with a friend of mine, and he's asking me how things are at the Press Telegram. I go, everybody here is real good, real friendly and real nice. And I remember distinctly hearing him pop his headphone jack out of the computer, and he starts to sing. And within a couple seconds, Matt starts to sing. And within a couple seconds, the whole department's singing, except me, because I'm on the phone. And I'm starting to laugh, though. And my friend on the phone is like, "Are you guys singing?" I'm like, "Yeah, they're singing." He goes, and he pauses, and he's listening to him sing, and he's like, "Are you guys singing Jesse's Girl?" And I go, "Yeah, they are singing Jesse's Girl." And I'm laughing really loud, and it's one of the funniest moments I had. And a couple months later, I started writing a blog, and I posted what kind of place it was at the Press Telegram, and I mentioned the fact that you just never know when somebody's going to start singing Jesse's Girl. And James saw that, posted all the lyrics to Jesse's Girl in the comment, and so I guess it could happen anytime.
It could happen anytime.
Matt Murray?
Thanks, Andres. I feel a little underdressed when I'm standing next to Andres. A little bit. Yeah, it's real rare that I wear shorts. But when Andres had told me that this was going to be more of a celebration rather than a very somber, "Oh, we remember James. He was a very nice guy," I figured this would be the one thing that he would want me to wear, this shirt. And when I came out of the bedroom, my daughter looked at me, she goes, "Why are you wearing that?" And if you can't see, it's a shirt completely made of bobbleheads. And of course, James loved baseball. But it's all the sports. It's all the teams of the league. And one of the running jokes in the sports department was that I would root for both the Dodgers and the Angels. Now, of course, James was an avid Angels fan. We have very strong Dodger fans in the department as well. And they would always tell me, "You have to choose a side. You have to pick a team to root for." And I was like, "Why? I don't have to pick. I pick them both. There's nothing wrong." Maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, we decide, Dave Felton, James, and I, we're going to go to a Dodger Angel Freeway Series game. And for the week preceding the game, I told him, "Look, tell you what, I will let you know. I will don the colors of the team that I will now root for from now on." And for the rest of the week, that's what I told him. I was like, "Look, I'm going to wear the team that I'm going to root for." And they're like, "Okay, we'll wait for your decision." Comes game time, we get to Angel Stadium, and I'm wearing a Cal State Fullerton jersey. Which, of course, ticked off both sides, the Dodgers and the Angel fans, and neither one want me rooting for their team. But I thought that this would be most fitting to wear today. But I think that I should, in honor of James, yes, I brought props. I should don my Angel cap in honor of James. All right, around my huge head. I was having a hard time trying to come up with what to talk about about James because I've known him for 20 years. I was watching a special on TV of Billy Crystal. Billy Crystal was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Mark Twain Society or something like that. And I thought, I wish we could do that. For the special, they brought out, stars who would come out and say, I starred with Billy Crystal in Throw Mama from the Train. Danny DeVito would come out. Or, Robert De Niro, I was with him with Analyze That, And then they would show clips. And I thought, how great would that be if we actually had the ability to say, hi, I'm Matt Murray. I starred in such films as James at his first summer camp. Or James and the abused telephone in the sports department, or James and the bag of Munchos. Now let me explain the Muncho bag joke. At the old building, we at 6th and Pine, we had the Rite Aid across the street, and every day we would go get something to eat or drink, and we would always ask James, what would you like? And James would say, could you get me iced tea and a bag of Munchos? Now, Munchos, that's not a delicacy, let me tell you. Not a good chip. And believe me, I know my chips. But I asked him one time, I was like, James, how can you eat that? That is just so utterly disgusting. And the one time that we actually talked about him being, sick or anything, he goes, dude, I spent so much time in the hospital eating hospital food that when I would ask for a treat, I would actually get a bag of Munchos, and that was like the best. And I thought, man, they must have been feeding you some really bad stuff in the hospital if the Munchos was the highlight of your treat. But because the type of person I am, I gave it a shot. So I bought 2 bags that day. Gave him his bag and his iced tea, and I sat down, cracked it open, took 1 chip, and gave the rest to James. As I had wrote and have told everyone ad nauseum that my dad was his scoutmaster in Troop 7, and he was the first Eagle Scout in the Long Beach Area Council who was in a wheelchair. And when I was talking with Bob, who did a great article on James, when I told him that, for a lot of people, this was their first interaction with someone their age in a wheelchair, I was talking about me. I really had no kind of interaction with anyone in a wheelchair. And it was James and the boys from Troop 7, Phillips, another one of the Boy Scouts that were there. They taught me so much, mostly because they're just regular guys. They like the exact same thing we all do. And I had received the Eagle Scout Award in 1989. And you're on top of the world. Because as she said, 2%, 2 out of every 100 scouts that start get the Eagle Scout Award. When James was going through the program, my dad was just pleased as punch when he got so close, and he didn't have to guide him after a while, because James had in his focus the prize that when you start out being a Boy Scout, you become an Eagle Scout. And when he achieved that rank of Eagle, regardless of whether he was in a chair or not, him and I were exactly the same. And from that day on, I kind of thought of him more of as a brother. Not that I didn't think of him about a brother before, but it just proved to me that, any preconceptions that I had of James, or anyone in a wheelchair, out the window. Because James was that kind of guy. And of course, our paths intersected many other times at Long Beach City College and at the Press-Telegram. I pretty much had no way to kind of wrap this up. So basically, I'm just going to say, to James, who's right here. James, you're a good friend, and I love you very much. And I'll keep the hat on.
Do you want to keep the bag? It's fine by me. All right. to thank Jordan High School for allowing us into their gym. We could have thought of 100 places James would have been happy. I think Jordan High School, the high school he went to and the high school he coached, obviously was probably one place that he would have loved. I want to thank Coach Massey. In fact, Coach Massey, if you want to come down, because you'll be speaking next. This is obviously his home. I remember when I used to take him to work a couple times. Every now and then we'd just go a different way, and one day we drove past Jordan High School, and he started telling me stories of when he was a coach, and he was assisting Mario Jimenez, who's now the principal here, and he was telling me a story about the very first time he did it, and it was a weekend of practice in November, just starting the season, and James is like, I remember telling Coach Jimenez once that after meeting all the players and after meeting all the coaches and just getting into the feel of things, James told Coach Jimenez, I'm really going to miss this team. And Coach Jimenez was like, how can you say that? The season's only, a week old. How can you miss this team when you still got 3 more months to go? And James was like, well, when it happens, you'll know. You'll figure it out. And James said about a month later, Coach Jimenez came up to him and said, geez, James, you're right. I am going to miss this team. And there's still 2 months left, and I don't know how to say goodbye to these guys, even though I don't have to say goodbye to them for at least another month. And so James always had a way of just seeing the bigger picture, and I think he'd be honored that you're speaking here today on his behalf, especially for Jordan High School. Coach?
Can you hear me if I talk like this? I thought back to when Jamie was in the gymnasium with us. We'd be practicing, going up and down. He'd be over there in the corner in his wheelchair. Steve would be over there in his wheelchair. And one day, and I told Frank about this, and he wrote about it. The kids were in practice. They weren't going hard. They were dogging it in practice. And I was getting upset. I was in my own peaceful, quiet self. I told them, you're wasting my time, you're wasting your time. Why don't you guys just get out of here and go home? And I went and started collecting the balls, and bam, 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 and I noticed Jamie wheeling his wheelchair out to the middle of the circle, and I overheard what he said. He told those guys, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. If I could get out of this chair, if I had the opportunity that you had, I'd get out of this chair and I'd work my butt off from the beginning of practice to the end of practice. And it was quiet, stone quiet. I was collecting the balls. 2 minutes later, the guys came in and said, Coach, we're ready to practice. And they went back out on the floor and had one of the best practices we've ever had. That was Jamie McElroy. Another thing, I've always watched him go around in this wheelchair, and I apologize for being so naive. I didn't realize Jamie could get around without a wheelchair. I did not realize that until one day we were getting ready to get on a bus. The next day we were supposed to get on a bus. Jamie said, I want to go to the game. I said, okay, the bus leaves at 6 o'clock. I believe it was. I said, he said, I'll be there, Coach, don't leave me. So the whole afternoon, instead of thinking about the team that we're supposed to be playing, I'm sitting there worried about how am I going to get Jamie on this bus and that wheelchair. And I should have been thinking about the team we're playing, but I didn't. So we got to the bus, the team got on the bus, and there's Jamie in his wheelchair. So I said, all right, here I go. Jamie hops out of the wheelchair and then starts explaining to me how to break the wheelchair down and fold it. All right, Coach, now you got to do this. No, wait, Coach, you're going too fast. Slow down. You got to do this. You got to do it. And the bus driver, a lady, she's sitting up there like this, looking at me, shaking her head, smiling. And so I finally get the wheelchair folded. I finally get it onto the bus, and I'm thinking, how am I going to pick him up and carry him on the bus? And so I'm walking back. I look at him, and there he is. He's doing it. I said, what do you mean? Go sit down, Coach. Go sit down. The next thing I know, he's jumping up. I don't know how he did it, but he went step by step by step. He got on that bus. He got into that seat on his own. And there's the bus driver looking at me, smiling. We got to the school. I get the wheelchair off, I put it down, I open it up, I turn around, there he is, coming down the steps by himself. He didn't need me. That was something. I learned a lot from that. And I look at the banners up there, I look at the World League Championships, and we had what we called rough times before we won those championships, when we barely could beat anybody. And I tell the guys who are on those teams, you are just as much a part of that banner and that banner as those guys who were on those teams, because you made me a better coach and a better person. Jamie McElroy, Steve Everett, you're as much of those championship teams, more league teams. You made me a better coach listening to your suggestions and your comments, and believe me, Jamie has some comments for me, especially when we lost. Those guys made me a better coach, and they definitely made me a better person. And so I want to thank you, Jamie, for everything you've done for me.
Work was a big part of James. I wondered when we started talking over the list of who would speak. I thought that the list may be too much press telegram, and I was told, but that was James. James was work, and James was there's a line from a TV show I love about work and the people you work with, and basically saying that you don't have anything in common with the people you work with, but you spend 40 hours a week with them. Probably you do more than your friends and your families. But if you can make a connection with somebody, it just makes the work so much better. And James made work so much better. I think if the folks that are coming up after speaking about working with James, they will tell you that looking at the schedule that day, if they saw James, they knew it was going to be a better day. I mean, they could have 20 pages all open, trying to fill stories, and if James was there, they knew James would lighten it up a little, because we'd all be stressing trying to get everything done. So the first person I want to bring up is Ben Villa. Ben worked with James for a great portion of time, probably the same amount, like 12 years. I think Ben is probably one of the greatest friends a person could have. I remember James telling me a story once when we were going to Las Vegas, and he told me that Ben one day, Ben was having a party in Las Vegas, and James couldn't make it because he had to work the first night. But James said that Ben, day one was partying in Las Vegas. The next day, Ben drives all the way back from Las Vegas to Long Beach to pick him up, and then drives back to Las Vegas. It's 8 hours. Anybody who's done that drive in a day can tell you it's really it's superhuman. It's kind of because of the heat and everything. And the fact that Ben did that for him just shows a lot that what James meant to us, because we'd be doing this for him. If James wasn't a great person, I don't think Ben would do that. If he was a Dodger fan, I know he wouldn't do that. But it just shows you how much James meant to us. It's just one example, but I think Ben was ultimately, one of the greatest friends like anybody can hope for. So, Ben.
I was working at the Press Telegram 3 years before James got there. And one day, Jim McCormick walks up to me and tells me that we're hiring a new person. And I went, okay, we need the help. And he told me that, this gentleman was in the wheelchair. And my first thought was, oh, like Matt, I didn't have too much contact with, anybody, James's condition. And honestly, I was worried how I was going to deal with it. And I was worried if James, could get the job done. But it soon became evident that if there was anybody that was handicapped, it was me, in my way of thinking. James Melroy was an extraordinary worker and a true professional in every sense of the word. He quickly rose the ranks from being a clerk to a reporter, to being a copy editor, to eventually being the prep editor. He was so proud in the fact that he could do every single duty at the Press Telegram, and he could probably do it better than anybody else. Write a story, he could do it. Do the scoreboard page, he could do it. Copy edit it, he could do it. Put on a headline, no problem. He was just a tremendous asset to the company, and the Press Telegram has no idea how much they're going to miss him, because James Melroy could literally do it all, and he literally excelled every day that he was there. But, work was just a small part of James Melroy. He was far more than that. I don't know how many people know, a couple of years ago, James started his own clothing line, Medieval. And even though it may not have been as successful as he would have liked, it wasn't because he didn't try. James lived his dreams, and he had the courage to do it. James Melroy was the commissioner of our fantasy football league. He was the manager of our softball team. The first time we took James to Vegas, he won $4,000 in one night playing blackjack. Who does that? James Melroy does that. And I don't mind saying, in front of his wonderful mom, Carol, that James Melroy had quite the social life. He was quite the ladies' man. He had girlfriends stretching from Orange County to Palmdale. And on one occasion, after I picked him up from a rendezvous in Lancaster, after the hour drive just beat me down, I finally said, James, I know you're a pimp, man, but can't you keep him in the county lines? Come on. You're killing me here. But of all the things that James loved, and there was many, the things that stood out the most were the two people right here in front of me. His wonderful mom, Carol, and his brother, Mike. James once told me that by the time he was 10 years old, he already had 25 operations. And through that all, his wonderful mom stood by him every single day. And while it could have been tough, she never left. She never ran from the responsibility. And I just wanted to say, Carol, you did a great job raising him. He was a great man. You did great. And Mike's brother here, he was so proud of him. Mike's going to be a junior at Lakewood High School, a 4.0 student. And of all the long talks we had with James, if there was one thing he wanted to make sure before he passed on, was that his brother was taken care of. And I think now that he's no longer with us, he can rest assured that he did a good job looking after Mike, and he'll be well taken care of. I can honestly say, Mike, you were the proudest thing in his life. He loved you too very much. As we loved him. And if you'll all indulge me just for a second, the last time I talked to James was about 24 hours after he passed. He called me about midnight because my father's ill with cancer. And James had just gone through something like this with his grandfather, who just recently passed away. So when the phone rang, I thought he wanted to badmouth the Angels or the Lakers, as we always did. But instead, he wanted to know if I was okay. He wanted to know if my mom was okay. He wanted to know if we had the support we needed in case we would go through something like he did. And that was James Melroy in a nutshell. He didn't care about himself. He never brought up his condition or his health. He wanted to make sure I was okay, my family was okay. And I'll never forget that as my last conversation with him. And, calling James Melroy my friend would be an injustice, because he wasn't. He was my brother, and I loved him. And, my whole life with him, I knew him in a wheelchair, but I never saw any man walk any taller than James. Thank you.
for many of us, first day of work in a new place is kind of scary, and you just want to fit in and you want to make sure you're okay. But you never imagine thinking spending the rest of your career or a great portion of your career working with someone you meet on the first day. And our next speaker, Fausto Ramos, had that luxury. Both were hired at the Press Telegram on the same day. And it's, I don't think any of us think about that, when you get hired, especially with somebody else, that you're going to be working with them for 10 years. And you may not know the person you're working with, but you hope that they're good employees and good coworkers. And I don't think Fausto could ever imagine the person he met that day would be such a good friend. So.
And it wasn't 10 years, it was 11 and a half years, so let's get that right. Not many know this, but on that first day of work, I was in a really bad accident, and I was late to work that day. And I love the newspaper, bear with me. And after leaving the hospital, I made it to the paper. And I was in pain, and I was complaining, and I met James. What was I complaining about? I was taken back too by the wheelchair. But it didn't take long to talk to James and get to know him. And if there's anybody I have to thank 1,000 times is Ben Villa. Because he recommended me for that job. So thank you, Ben, very much. 11 and a half years, I try to explain to my friends what kind of atmosphere we have in the sports room. You can't put it in words. The people that I've worked with, I can see some of you are here, it's beyond the family. It's beyond, any kind of friendship. We don't punch a clock. We don't wear ties. We wear shirts and t-shirts and shorts. That's who we are. We get to watch TV while we work. And sometimes we don't meet deadlines. Sorry. But I couldn't work at a better place, and James made it a great place to work. Over 11 and a half years, waiting outside for his ride, for his mom. Sometimes his brother would come. He'd tell me, go, I'll wait by myself. No way I was going to leave him there. Because the talks that we had during that time, they were great. They were about my family, my mom, his mom, our problems, our aches and pains, my back, his back, we connected very well. Over the 11 and a half years, we got to share. The Lakers win 3 championships. I'll never forget that. And I'll never forget his Rams beating my Tennessee Titans in the Super Bowl either. And he'll never let me forget that. But I also got to see his smile when his beloved Angels won the World Series. I am one of those big Dodger fans. And I remember sharing with him. He was probably one of the first ones to know I was getting married. And he was very proud and very happy for me. But he also chuckled because my wife's an Angel fan. So I know he's laughing right now. But we got to share a lot. It transcended beyond the work. Steve hit it on the mark when he said he was a great listener. That is a true friend. Knowing when to speak and knowing when not to speak. He listened very well. And when he did give advice, it was great advice. He listened to coaches on the phone rant and rage about their roundup not being in the paper. He listened to parents complain about their kids' names not being in the paper. At times, yes, he would put them on hold and then bang the phone on the desk. That was a great sight. to see and hear. But yeah, James Melroy is a great man. So I will greatly miss him. My grandfather passed 2 months ago. He was 103 years old. I got to share that with James because I know what he was going through. I also remember the last phone call. I know a lot of you don't know if you know, the desks have been moved to Torrance with the breeze, and left behind was James Melroy at Long Beach. That was hard to deal with because he was there answering those phones all alone. But he did it because he knew how to do everything. I remember talking to him and sharing one of my latest journeys in life is my wife and I adopting 2 beautiful girls. He was so happy for me. His eyes lit up. I remember showing him pictures of them. And he said, man, I was happy for you at first, but now, man, I feel sorry for you because they are cute. So he knew what was going to happen in the future. So I just wish my girls could have met him. James was a great guy, great, great guy. You brought up a great son. And Mike, his future years, you remember everything he taught you. Because he knew. I learned from him. We all learned from him. So, I miss you, James.
Next speaker I want to bring up is somebody who left the Press Telegram about a year before I got there, named Ryan Blystone. Ryan and James still communicated quite frequently, if I recall. So they were always, friendly and whatnot. Late night Friday nights, going to O'Connell's and things like that. Stories I had only heard because once I got there, it all stopped for some reason. But but the one thing I remember about Ryan, and it wasn't so much a story as something, and it was an observation I had made when I was working back in the old building at the Press Telegram, 6th and Pine. They used to keep all the old farewell pages, and I would look at all of them. Everybody had come and gone before that, and I saw Ryan's, and I didn't know who Ryan was. I just knew the farewell page, and the typical farewell page is usually one of the staffers with his head, on top of an athlete's body, and usually a funny story that goes along with it and whatnot. And every time I looked at Ryan's, there's always one thing that made me laugh, and it was a picture of Ryan, mugshot, just a little tiny picture of Ryan, right next to Harold Ramis, saying that Ryan is his love child. And I saw that, and every time I saw that, I started laughing. I go, whose idea was this? And James is like, oh, it was my idea. He goes, he said he told you that within the first week or something, he thought that you were Harold Ramis. And he just, and so I laughed, and he started telling me stories, of course, but I always remember that because the fact that I didn't know you, but I seemed like, I should have known you, because James obviously made the effort so much to make it, like that. So, Ryan.
I'm not great at public speaking, so I have 3 pages of a tribute, and I'm sorry. I know this is a celebration of life, but for me, I have titled this "My Forever Friend." And obviously, everyone, I'm Ryan Blystone, and I'm a friend of James Melroy, and it feels really good to say those words. I knew him for 8 years, and I consider it a true honor. 4 of those years came while working in the Long Beach Press Telegram's windowless sports department office in the old Pine Avenue building. During that time, and thankfully long after I left the newspaper business, our friendship remained intact. We're celebrating his life today, and it's fitting that it's taking place at this high school alma mater and inside a facility where he surely spent some of his precious time forming numerous other lifelong friendships. For me, the bond between James and I is something I'll always cherish, It's a friendship built on knowing a person with whom I have a few things in common. We're able to talk about anything, good or bad, and most importantly, sarcastically joke about the other person, followed quickly by the dual sound of laughter that instantly reassures you everything is fine and that you've found a friend for life. Our main connection, beyond the easy ones such as liking sports, the newspaper business, and Las Vegas, was a passion for professional wrestling. You might call it fake, you might call it a waste of time. For me and James, it's what brought us together as friends. I don't remember the exact moment when the connection surfaced, but it was likely because of a conversation occurring somewhere between James taking prep sports calls in his own special way, as Fausto so generously told us, and me working on the other side of the room as a slot editor or a rim shift at the other end of the office. A lot of conversations in the sports department involved people shouting things back and forth, even when it was done through the PT message system. For whatever reason, my memories of the now defunct American Wrestling Association when I was growing up in Denver and seeing performers like Baron von Raschke and Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant and Jesse Ventura and watching old World Wrestling Federation TV matches helped me bond with James. We'd talk about it all the time, and pretty soon he and I began attending live events when the World Wrestling Entertainment and the Pro Wrestling Guerrilla brought their matches to Anaheim and Los Angeles respectively. We'd watch WWE Raw at the Honda Center or inside a small, sweaty community center with no air conditioning for PWG, which is a very small independent promotion. It didn't matter. We saw it all, and we loved every minute of it. When we weren't attending an event, James had countless matches on tape and on DVD for us to watch. He'd loan them to me, and we'd go back and forth on what we liked and what we didn't like. Sometimes we'd disagree, but it never mattered if we thought differently. James and I respected each other's opinion and celebrated the differences. I think that's a common characteristic for anyone who ever met him, and regardless of topic, work, sports, women, wrestling, a TV show, or movie, he always had respect for others. Majority of our time together centered on wrestling or attending an Angels game, but I was also one of the many people who to drive James home from work after a late night at the office. And the conversations we had in the car always were a lot of fun. Nothing was off limits, much like in the sports department. And I always learned a lot and learned a little bit more about him every time, and how he lived a life that's definitely to be admired and envied at times, despite his considerable discomfort. He wrote me an email back in January that I wanted to have just a blip from. And he says, "I've been dealing with pain all of my life. I've undergone 27 surgeries in my life. The doctors always told me that as I got older, I would be in worse and worse shape. These were the same doctors who always marveled at my ability to handle the pain. Growing up, I never took pain medication, and I would basically just grin and bear it. I was fine with it and even thrived with my disability. I played sports, rugby, tennis, baseball, basketball, and lived life pretty normally for a gimp." James wrote LOL, laugh out loud, after the word gimp, demonstrating his wonderful, sarcastic wit. He was an inspiration to all who met him, and his positive attitude certainly endeared him to those who helped him lead a happy, fulfilling life as an Eagle Scout, as a team manager and coach for Jordan High Basketball, as award-winning editor, writer, and page designer for the Long Beach City College student newspaper, and finally, as a valuable and versatile employee at the Press-Telegram for the last 11 plus years. Unquestionably, his greatest role model was his grandfather, who unfortunately passed away or last month. And its last newspaper story was about his grandfather, and he relished his relationship with what he called the strongest man I've ever known. We often, I'm going to go off the script here a little bit, we often would post on a website called sportsjournalist.com, and everyone keeps their identity to themselves, and that's a big thing. But for James, with his grandfather, he needed to get it out, and he needed to let people know, and he let people in, because that's the way James is. And he wrote a very touching post, and again, I want to just talk a little bit about it. "My grandfather is the man I considered dad. Growing up, he'd play catch with me. He taught me about sports. He also taught me what it was to provide for a family. I learned about priorities in life, making sure your family was taken care of, and that was rule number one. And it continued to be that rule well until the family was taken care of. Only then were you allowed to spoil yourself. And he ended his post by asking those who read his words to call someone in your life that means as much to you as he does to me, and let them know. I responded to his request with a short message of support, and I called two of my good friends I'd not spoken to in weeks, and I felt good. While I followed his orders, I've also beaten myself up a bit since June 26th. I feel bad that James wasn't one of those I reached out to beyond a few words on a website's message board. If I could have had one more conversation with James, we'd talk about his favorite sports teams, Lakers, Rams, Angels, UCLA. I'd seek his insight on the current state of pro wrestling. One of his favorites is CM Punk. He's won the World Wrestling Entertainment Championship, actually, ironically, on June 30th, in a surprise but satisfying move that would have made him very proud. I also would have asked him about mixed martial arts, a sport he grabbed hold of and got the press telegram on board with. His stories about MMA have really been a hit with online readers everywhere. I'd give anything to hear him talk about reality show addictions that he had, Big Brother, American Idol, or hear him excitedly talk about the upcoming movie, The Dark Knight. I know I'm not alone in my request. After reading a terrific story and tribute by Bob Kaiser in the press telegram, I was moved to leave a comment, and I'd like to share part of it with everyone. I've heard so many wonderful thoughts from people who knew him. Some knew him for much longer than me, some much less. Everyone has a favorite story of their time with James, and to me, that's what makes James so important in all of our lives. He meant something to everyone, and everyone got their own moment with James. His memory, as I've said to others, will always be with me. His love for his family is something everyone should emulate. His younger brother, Michael, is a very good kid, a very good student. James was always on him, making sure he was taking care of business. His mother, Carol, is a loving, caring, and wonderful person. She needs to know that she did a superb job with James. If, after reading Bob Kaiser's story, and I hope everyone has or will, and you're compelled to do something positive for James, may I make a suggestion? Tell your family and friends you love them and remind them of this every day and in different ways. Your life will be better for it. It's the best way to honor James, a person who reminded everyone in his life in his own special way that he loved them. I hope James is listening now, and I'm sure he is. Hey James, it's me, Ryan. Consider this my chance to personally thank you for your friendship, past, present, and future. You are forever my friend, James. I love you.
In the situation, I figured, Ben was talking about raising money and funds, and I'm thinking, what's the best way to do that in a way that James would have wanted? And I think of, I remember James say stuff, and I had a pretty good idea that, a car wash wasn't going to do it because he probably wouldn't have wanted to see Matt at a car wash, Matt Murray up there. So that wasn't going to work. So we tried to come up with unusual, different ways I think James would have liked. The T-shirt was one of them. We thought about it. For those of you who haven't seen it on the front display, I had an idea. Ben Villa took it one step further, and then Anel Hulk and David Feenstra took it home. And so let me just explain it a little bit. First of all, like I said, it was a T-shirt. I asked Ben what should be on the front, and Ben was like, well, he always liked those T-shirts that were kind of little poking fun at himself in a way, and he's like, well, we just get a handicap placard and just put, I did it for the parking. And I'm thinking, can we just make it say James did it for the parking? He's like, oh, that sounds better. The backside is something David Feenstra drew, and I asked Dave if he could draw something, and Dave said he could do that. And I go, do you have anything in mind? He goes, I got a good idea. After seeing Episode 1, Star Wars, they saw Yoda in this floating chair, and he goes, after the movie, James says, I want that chair. I don't want wings when I die. I want Yoda's floating chair. And as it says here, apparently it said, wings are for fairies. I want a chair like Yoda. So we got, Feenstra gave him his his Yoda chair. Also in that back of it is one of his favorite quotes from the movie Braveheart: "Every man dies, not every man really lives." And unfortunately, we have some corrections also to make on the shirt. It says $15, but I think the price is going to be a little bit more. If it's $15, probably just for the front, but total, if you want the front and back done, it'll be about $22, $25. There's website, so you can go to the website and we'll take care of it. There's also an order form in case you don't have internet. We can get the orders taken care of and whatnot, and we'll sure to get you a t-shirt. The other thing is, as on the directions, there's information on if you want to buy a memorial book. You know, everybody's been contributing to this. Right now it has a couple stories, but it's going to get fuller, hopefully, after today. And if you have any stories that you want to contribute to this, by all means, my email address is on here. You can send it to me, and we'll be happy to put it in the book. Again, and then if you want a copy, you know, we can get you that. And also, hopefully we can get a DVD of this service being made. Robert Meeks is filming this right now for us. Well, he's actually filming it for the Press Telegram, but I'm sure he can make us a copy. We ask him very nicely. There's so many people I want to thank before I start speaking. There have just been a lot of people involved in this. I mean, obviously Jordan High School for allowing the gym. All the speakers that came up here, you guys have done a wonderful job. And I know Steve's going to do a wonderful job when he gets up here. Dave Werstein for opening up his house for the reception afterwards. That's an extraordinary a gift that he given us. Those of you who helped out with the book, copy editing that would be Austin Lewis and Jody Collins. And another contributor to that book was Chris Lettermuller. Pam's also contributed. I've contributed. Ryan is a big help getting all the posts from the website, either the Stress Telegram website or the Sports Journalist website. So we have that in here as well. I want to thank Bob Kaiser for writing such a wonderful piece on the Saturday, 2 days after he passed. I know it was hard, especially calling me because I was crying. But I want to thank my roommate Gracie, who helped out with some of the stuff, and Joe Hawkinson and the Press Telegram for allowing me to go in there and create some of the stuff for today. And if I missed anybody, I'm really sorry. Days before he passed, letting him know that I would be able to take him to the Ultimate Fighting in Las Vegas this past Saturday. And after I had heard, I wasn't even thinking about that. It wasn't until a couple days later I thought, you know, I have the credential. I don't know if I should go or not. And I thought of James, and I think James would have wanted me to go, but I wanted to come back with something. And so what I came back with was his media credential. James never kept his media credentials, and I don't know why. I've been a reporter for about, well, I was a reporter, but I've been a reporter for about 3 years before I got to the Press Telegram. And I have about 90 to 95% of all my credentials, whether it be just high school sports or, you know, professional tennis or whatnot. And it always struck me that James never kept his. And I remember when we stay in the hotel, we'd come back and I'm like, hey man, do we got everything? He's like, yeah dude, let's go. And I'm looking around, just doing a double check, and I see his credential on the table. I go, hey, don't you want your credential? He's like, no, what do I need it for? I can't get back into it. You sure? You sure you don't want to keep it just to hold on to it? He's like, no, what do I need it for? And so I left it there. And he did that, this happened quite often. Whether after an event we were just going to drive straight back from Las Vegas, he would just leave the credential in the casino. And, you know, I just left it there. And it wasn't until I thought about it and really thought about it and thought, you know, he really didn't need the credential after all. I mean, I like to keep on to things like that, but the life that he had led, he didn't need a memento. He had the memories. And so it truly did leave a full life. And as everyone here has talked about that, you know, he was an extraordinary human being. I mean, and I can't even describe how extraordinary he was, just what he did and what he meant to so many people. I thought about, you know, I thought about, you know, the fact that if you were to take my life and write it out on paper, and you take James' life, write it out on paper, excluding any fact that he was, you know, disabled or whatnot, and you just told people, a room full of strangers, to read these two lives, and they would clearly say James led a more interesting life. And I have to agree with that. I mean, I can't think of the most dangerous thing I did was probably playing high school sports, and people will look at that as like, okay, but you look at James and you look at the most dangerous thing he probably did was something called murder ball. And for those of you who don't know, and especially a room full of strangers, and you see that, you're like, well, I don't know if this is legal, but that's obviously more impressive than just any high school sport that you can play. But that's what James, he always had the one up on you, and which made it great because, when a situation came where you needed to talk to someone, he'd either been there or he had been there even worse, but he knew what to do in that situation. I mean, but after meeting James, the time I had with James, my life did become more interesting. I have a lot to owe for James for that. I mean, obviously I don't go to the UFC if it's not for James. I don't, write stuff out again. I don't try to become a writer again in a blog or even at some reporting events if needed. And if it wasn't for James, I can't say this without a smile and a laugh, but if it wasn't for James, I wouldn't have had lunch with a Playboy centerfold once. And that was James. He did that. He arranged it. He arranged so much. And I think the biggest lesson that I've learned from James was that despite any limitations of the human body, the human heart is truly limitless. And so I'm going to say to James, I hope we gave you a nice memorial. I hope you're smiling. I hope you've pulled yourself away from showing the Saints what UFC is all about, giving us about 90 minutes of your time up there to let us talk and let us remember you. I know I came to you for a lot of help and a lot of advice, and you're always there for me. But I don't worry about you not being there because I know you'll always be there. Because, if I were to get into trouble or whatnot, I know that there's a lighthouse on for me, showing me how to get home safely again. And I never have to worry about that. So James, I love you, and I miss you, but I know you'll always be there. So, next speaker. Stop that, you're gonna make me cry. Stop, thank you. Our next speaker will be representing the family. His name's Steve Everett. Steve, I think, is probably the most, if I were to be envious here, it'd be Steve, because he'd probably known Steve since I've heard the age of 2, is that correct? Yeah, you've known him a long time. And I mean, I can only imagine, having a relationship with that. I mean, I don't have any friends that I've known for that long, but I mean, it's just an amazing, I figure that's amazing. And I do remember seeing pictures of you when I'd come over at James' house and you two were there shaking hands with Kobe and whatnot. And, I wish I knew more, but I do know enough. So, I mean, I'd like to thank you. And Steve's going to be representing the family. And let me set this up real quick.
Everybody hear me okay? Okay. Well, it's been quite a tribute to James. He's been a lifelong buddy, known him when he was 2 years old. And we were introduced by a fellow doctor, the doctor that dealt with, well, this thing's going crazy, isn't it? Sorry. There you go. That's good. Is it my magnetism?
I don't know.
Got it. That's all right.
Actually, if we did it this way, I think we'll be okay.
Oh, there you go.
I think if the microphone is away from the speaker. You okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
All right. He's cracking up right now. You know that, right? Yeah. We were introduced to each other, our families were, by a doctor named Dr. Hoffer. Dr. Hoffer was the leading authority in arthrogryposis, and a great way for our families to meet and kind of know what was in store with each other, growing up children with our particular situation. Little did our parents know what they were really in store for, were they? We went to schools together. I was a little bit older than him. And we started off at Tucker Elementary School here in Long Beach. And as I moved on into middle school and then on to high school here at Jordan, it would never fail. You know, I would leave and then he would come in. And when I graduated from high school, you know, we knew each other as kids and joking and having a good time and talking about sports. My first initial impression of James is that he was just a mini version of me. I mean, we looked a little bit the same, and, you know, with our disability in our hands. And, of course, you know, our wit was very close to being the same. Okay, it was a lot like that. When I went to high school and here at Jordan, I graduated, and sure enough, Jamie came in the next year. And every time we would talk, he'd say, yeah, he goes, man, you had no idea what it was like growing up, going to schools behind you. He goes, I got called Steve Everett all my life. All my life, Steve Everett. And he says, he even had a name. He called it Steve-O-itis. He just made it up. He said, yeah, I got Steve-O-itis today. Somebody called me Steve Everett. And, of course, I would grin and gloat. And he said one particular situation was here at Jordan, a teacher had come up, and he had written a report or something, and she called him Steve Everett. And, of course, he griped to me and complained to me, and I just kind of cracked up. And he goes, laugh it up, superstar. He says, you know what that means, don't you? And I said, no. He goes, that means that teacher thought it took you 8 years to graduate. But in all fairness, I must say there was a time where somebody confused me for him. It was at a mall, and of course I did tell him. It was at a mall, and the gentleman came up to me and said, you know, I just want to thank you for all that you did for Jordan High School. I got a little proud. All right. He said, yeah, I was there the night that you dedicated that ramp to the football stadium. And I was looking around like, okay. And of course, Jamie, when I'm telling the story, I have to call him Jamie. A lot of people call him James. Jamie's what I grew up calling him. Jamie's tickled. You know, he's looking at me. He's getting a little gloaty and a little cocky, and he goes, so, what'd you tell the guy? And I said, well, you know, I told him, thank you very much. It was an awful lot of hard work that I put forward. And we were able to overcome and make it happen. And he looked at me with that sarcastic look and that eyebrow that always went up when he was wanting to get ready to bust your chops. And I said, and he goes, then what happened? I said, well, then the guy reached out his hand to me and says, shook my hand. He said, what was your name again? I said, Steve Everett. That's right. That's right. That was definitely it. No doubt about it. We were also because we hung out a lot together through all the various sports that we did and you know, the things that we were about, getting in trouble and stuff. People would always come up to us and say, are you guys brothers? Jamie would always jump up and say, what are you kidding? I'm way better looking than that guy. Come on. Yeah, always, always. So as you can see, we had a lot in common, including our warped sense of humor. Jamie was quick-witted, If you weren't ready for that wit, you better look out, because he was coming strong. He was always smarter than me, too. I could never figure that out. He was like an encyclopedia, especially with sports. You can ask him any trivial thing about sports, he would blurt out the answer. Movies, songs. You guys are talking about singing songs in your department. I was one of those guys that called up and pressed telegram, and of course, James, I could hear in the background people rocking out. Usually it was like an 80s song, one of those ones that just you can never get rid of. It's in your brain forever. He always, talked about the Press Telegram and how much it was just a wonderful place and the friends that he developed. And I feel like I know a lot of you, even though I've never met some of you face to face. I would always ask about some of the key writers, what does Burleson think about the next big it in basketball? Doug and his articles and Bob and his articles. And occasionally we talk about Ben's articles. We'd critique them a little bit, Ben. Sorry about that. Sports was a big part of our lives growing up. Most of that was due to the fact that our grandparents influenced us, mostly our grandfathers. My dad took me to a Dodger game when I was 6 years old, so I was one of those Dodger fans. Yes, I was. There was no really wheelchair sports at the time that we could participate, with the exception of just goofing off, and having a good time with that. And that was always big on our hearts. It was something we always wanted to do. We knew if we went to high school, if we were able-bodied, we'd be right in there competing in some kind of sport. When we went to Jordan here, when I managed the Jordan basketball team and went up to Coach Massey and asked him, I said, I really want to be involved in basketball. It's my passion of mine. And Jamie followed as well when he came here and managed the basketball team, as you guys all heard. Sorry if I'm repeating some things, but it's part of what I got to tell you. One thing I just need to take a second and say is Coach Massey. James and I, we talked about this on numerous occasions. And we want to thank you for being the man that you are. You allowed us to be part of the Jordan family, the basketball team. You have no idea what that meant to us. I was here, as well as James, through those tough Jordan days where we took it on the chin. And as we came out of the funk and ended up playing and doing well and making CIF, first time I think that when you were as a coach here at Jordan, you made CIF. I remember calling James and telling him about it. He was all excited. And then James carried on through his heyday here at Jordan. And we've seen many, many successes coming through this place, as well as a lot of people's hearts that were touched. I know James would have wanted me to speak about one gentleman. His name was Anthony Livingston. Anthony was one of James' good friends, and he was here as a basketball player, good student, but he was a teacher's aide for Mario Mena's adapted PE class. And James and him instantly developed a friendship, and he meant a lot to James. Mario, later after James graduated, Mario and Coach Massey invited him to be part of the coaching staff. I happened to be already coaching at Lakewood High. Sorry, Massey. But I had an opportunity to coach there. I coached girls softball and boys basketball. And I know Mario was a big influence on Jamie. He really helped him out a lot and really helped him to kind of set his mind on, what he could do and open the doors if he wanted to coach. James had a knack for working with youngsters. He was just awesome at it. This one particular night, Jordan was playing Lakewood, and I don't know how this worked out, but I was the assistant JV coach. He was assistant JV coach for Jordan. We're playing each other, and it just so happens to be I see Mario standing up, raising a little cane on a specific no call. He thought it was a no call. I think we all kind of thought, what is he yelling at? But I think I figured it out. Next thing I know, Mario's getting booted. He's getting kicked out of the game. And there's James coaching the team. And within seconds, the coach I'm coaching with, he gets kicked out of the game. So there's me and Jamie going heads up. This happened late in the third quarter, and the team had my team had like a 25-point lead. And I see Jamie call timeout, and he's rounding the troops up, and I'm just kind of going, okay, guys, let's hang on one more quarter. We got this one. And he throws some tenacious press on us that we just couldn't handle. And I kept looking up at the clock like, come on, clock. And every time out we would call, I'd look over at him and he'd look at me, and we kind of, he had that little grin on his face like, I'm getting you. And I'm like, no, you're not. And, it was kind of fun, back and forth, back and forth. He got that game tied. We went into overtime. And it was a great battle. He had those kids bought into his system and what was going to work, and they were a completely different team. It came down to the wire. We ended up winning. It took free throws to win it at the end of the game, and after the game, we went up to each other and shook hands, and I told him it was incredibly impressive with what he did with that team and how he came back. And I said, it was the most enjoyable coaching experience that I ever had. I started playing wheelchair tennis, traveling all over the world in various tournaments. Jamie would come out and watch me, root me on when I played locally. Most of the time when I say rooting me on, usually he critiqued my game. And, it was just great to see him in the crowd. Along came wheelchair rugby. Finally, a sport that Jamie could play. You heard it referred to as murder ball. Let me tell you, it's everything as the name says. These guys are going 100 miles an hour in their chairs, strapped in, of course, bodies flying, they're crashing each other. It's played in a basketball gym. There's goals at each end of the court, and the object is to carry the volleyball past the goal line, and that's how you score. In the meantime, guys are trying to tip you over, crash into you, stop you. We got asked to start a team up with Long Beach Memorial Hospital, so we did, and the first person I called was James, said, hey, you want to play? I said, absolutely. So the rest was history. We later moved on to Rancho Los Amigos Hospital, had a team, and started traveling, doing various things. And if you've already figured out a little bit about kind of our warped sense of humor, a lot had to do with us joking about ourselves, our disabilities, and those kind of things. It helped. It's very therapeutic because we don't take things so serious when a lot of other people do. I remember watching Jamie one day playing rugby, and let me tell you what, this guy was amazing. As amazing he is on the paper, he was on the court. He had the court sense because he coached basketball, so he knew about spacing and all the different intricacies of sports. He understood how to manage the time. He was tenacious. He was like that one guy on the team that was like the little gnat that you just couldn't get rid of. That was Jamie. And I remember one guy, he told him, "Get off me, you little troll." And Jamie looked at him, and it's probably pretty much the only time I ever seen Jamie get a little bit fired up. I mean, he gets fired up, but like competitive fired up. He said, "Oh yeah?" He says, "Well, if I'm the troll, you ain't crossing the bridge." And for the next 5 times down court, he didn't let the guy get past half court. He just blocked him. And the play's going down here, but everybody's focus is down here, and the bench is cracking up, and everybody's laughing up. But, I mean, it was a great time. He was well respected by his peers, his competitors. He was always a gentleman after the game, wasn't a poor loser, always shook your hand and looked you square in the eyes and said, "Good job." And I'll never forget those kind of things. Major sports was a big part of our lives. We both always talked about the Rams, even though they moved. We were Rams fans. UCLA fans. Of course, Lakers. I mean, I would call sometimes a press telegram, and he'd recognize that it was me, and I'd try to disguise my voice, and he'd say, "No, they're not going to trade Lamar Odom," or "No, we're not getting Kevin Garnett, so get that out of your head." And he'd make comments like that, joking with me. And of course, I was also on the other side of that Dodger-Angel rivalry. He actually told me that I was a Dodger fan, but I liked the Angels if the Dodgers were out of it. And he said, "You can't do that. That's un-American. You just can't do that." So we went around and around about that. I invited him to his very first fantasy football league. We actually played basketball together. Talk about a room full of statistic geeks. That's what we were. And, it was definitely a great, I guess I opened up a monster because he just became like the fantasy guru of every league. He was in like 5 different leagues and stuff, but we always had a good time talking about that kind of stuff. Jamie absolutely loved the press telegram. He made me jealous because he was one of the only people that I know that, in my lifetime, that actually truly enjoyed what he did. It was his life. It was what he did. And I don't know about a lot of you, but I can't say that when I drive into work at 5 a.m. in the morning, that I actually like getting up that early and going to work. But Jamie truly liked it. I became an even bigger fan of his writing as I started to listen to more of his articles and read more of his articles and stuff. And in one particular time, he actually did a feature article on me and Brent Poppin playing in the 1998 U.S. Open Championships. And of all the articles that have been written on some of the things that I've done, that article is the best. Not just because he's my friend, because he knew the value of putting a sports article together, not a human interest article. And so many times we talked about how wheelchair athletes, wheelchair sports, we look for them in the paper and they're on the human interest section. And he took that to heart in those discussions and made it happen. And it was a great article. I often gave him rides to all his sporting events, and it was amazing to me how the coaches respected him, how people knew him, the players, the way they treated him. I was with him when he actually got to interview Mark Madsen. He was like a kid in a candy store when he got to do that. A Laker, his first Laker that he got to interview. And it was just neat. He had the recording, so of course as we're driving home in my van, he's playing it for me, and it was neat how he turned it into a neat article. We went to the Summer Pro League, and Steve actually was there. We went to watch the Lakers. And during that Summer Pro League, Kobe and his wife happened to be there. And of course, all eyes were on Kobe. And slowly but surely, they're exiting the arena. And you know, me and Jamie are kind of looking. And I think what had happened was a security guard probably thought we were there to like really want to check out Kobe or, you know, get a good look at him. And really, with our warped sense of humor, we weren't there to see Kobe. We were there to see what a 7-carat diamond ring really looked like. And afterwards, we were like, wow, did you see the size of that rock on her finger? That was big. So, yeah. Steve got a great picture of it. And Jamie surprised me. I had no idea that Steve was there. And Jamie kind of gave him the high sign. And so there's a picture of me and Jamie shaking Kobe's hand. And didn't get the diamond ring, but there's a good picture of me. Yeah, good. But yeah, and then all of a sudden he surprised me with this photo. It was, you know, that's how he was, very giving. He was very, very good with my family. My mom and dad and sister knew Jamie as basically part of my family, just like I feel like I'm part of theirs. I remember when my wife got pregnant with our first child, and I called Jamie and said, we got to get together. I just want to hang out a little and talk. Sure. So we met up at Cervello's, and I said, hey, I got some news. I said, I'm going to be a dad. Ruth's pregnant. And he looked at me with this very, very serious look on my face. He says, Steve-O, because I just want you to know that I will put all my investigative skills together, my news reporting skills together, and I will find out exactly who's responsible for this. My kids adored him. Jamie had a way with kids. He always said it was because he was their same size, and he could see them eye to eye. I remember one particular time my daughter, Jamie came over. My daughter was all excited. And all of a sudden they disappeared. He said, Jamie, I need to show you something. They disappeared for about 30 minutes. She took them in her bedroom and she came back rolling out. And Jamie comes around the corner and he's got a Barbie doll in one hand. He's got makeup on his face, some earrings, a little bonnet. She took care of him. And he just smiled like, okay, no big deal, you know. He let her dress him up. And I remember one time picking him up for one of his events and taking him to one of his events, and I yelled at my son, who's 5 years old, or 6 now, to come out and help Daddy move the car seat into the back seat. And he came rocking out, and he had this look on his face. He said, no, Dad, we'll leave that there, because then now Jamie can see over the dash. So Jamie got a really good kick out of that when I told him about that, and I pulled up with the car seat in the front seat. Family support is big. It was huge in my life. I know what it takes to have parents that will allow you to go through life without being overly careful, overly concerned. it's very close that James and I kind of grew up in a same scenario where our parents did allow us to do those things. And I think that's a tribute to the character of the parents and the gifts that, they have. I know Carol, James spoke many times. We always talked about our mothers and how important it was. And just like Ben said, you guys are extremely important to us. I'm a strong believer that God only allows certain people to handle those kind of circumstance, and you truly are a gift. Truly are. And like they said before, Mike, you were your brother's prized pupil, let's just say. He thought the world of you, and he was extremely, extremely proud. I think if Jamie could come back and just say a couple things to all of us. I think one of the things, 4 things I think he would say. Number 1 is always put God first in your life in whatever you do. Always think about that. Number 2, like somebody else mentioned earlier, tell all your friends and family on a daily basis how much you love and appreciate them. Don't let a day go by without telling them. Number 3, always put others first. Take the focus off yourself. In today's society, it's very difficult because we're a me kind of society. But if you think about James, just like Ben said, he called him to see how he was doing with his father. He was very much that way. He wanted to always take the focus off himself. He would probably be laughing at the way I was dressed right now. He'd say, he'd give me a hard time. Why are you guys making such a big deal about me? It's not that big of a deal. He said, you should be wearing a hoodie with your ball cap on backwards and your shorts, like we always do. That's what he would be doing right now. 4th, I think he would tell us all that it's extremely important to laugh, and laugh often. Even through the toughest times, even when things are difficult, always find some humor, because it's therapeutic. Jamie could, like they said, could always break the ice, even in the toughest moments. What I'll miss about James I'll miss our weekly conversations. I'll miss him calling me loser when he calls, what's up, loser? I'll miss eating nachos at Cervello's with him, watching sporting events. Us basically deciding who the Lakers should and should not take in the draft, or what kind of trades we need to get Mitch and Phil to do. But most of all, I'll miss the unexpected phone calls that I got when I needed them the most, when times were not real good, or he knew that I was going through. Sometimes he didn't know. He just had a canny ability of making that call and lighten me up one moment. I referred to you that we often was considered brothers, are you guys brothers? And I just have to say, James, I'm absolutely proud to even be considered your brother. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, the reception is Next, those of you going, make sure you pick one of these up. The directions are on there. I can't help to think what James would say today, but I think I'd let him get the last joke. So if you click the program, you'll get what he says. Thank you for coming.